Well, all right. Welcome to Beyond the Pulpit. My name is Derek Wadley, and I am joined by nobody right now. And so we do have a really exciting episode for you today. Dan and Luke aren't here right now because we just got done interviewing Dr. Albert Mohler. We got to sit down with him for about 30 minutes, and I'm not sure if you heard or not, but there is an election coming up. And so we wanted to talk about it. We wanted to engage with him and talk through about how, as Christians, we should be thinking about this election. How do we balance putting our hope in the Lord and being engaged in this process? And so, without any further delay, we just want to turn it over now to our interview with Dr. Albert Mohler. All right. We are joined by Dr. Albert Mohler, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And we're really thankful that you could take the time and sit down with us and speak to us about this upcoming election. Yes. And so our first question just is, every year I tend to hear the phrase that this is the most consequential election of this or any lifetime that has ever happened. And there seems to be a lot of really unique issues at stake in this particular election. So I'm wondering, how would you counsel Christians to think about this election? Not necessarily politics or elections in general, but this particular election.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question. And, it sets up an interesting question. Is it true that this is the most important election in our history? And I can say that in one sense, maybe even in two senses, that is a legitimate statement. And one of them is that, we're really not responsible for the election of 1860. But in our lifetime, this is an extremely important election. And the second reason explains why that's justified. And that is because the government is now dealing in issues. And some of the pressing issues that are at stake in the 2024 election, they're beyond just questions of public policy. They're invading the territory of creation order. And so, we're actually talking about all of a sudden having political ramifications from an election having to do with whether a boy's a boy and a girl's a girl. And so that's just one example of the fact that, if the issues separating the candidates were marginal tax rates, no, this would not be the most consequential election in American history. But that's not all that's at stake here. In fact, no one's even had the time in this election to talk about marginal tax rates. We're talking about much more important issues.
Yeah, I think that's right. It does seem like we're talking a lot more about fundamental creation order issues in this particular election, like not just the value and dignity of human life, but something I think you said on the briefing this morning, just so basic as gender, which is right there in creation. And so it seems like we're talking about much bigger things.
Yeah, we have one side in this election. And look, neither side in this election is perfect. We know that. As a matter of fact, there's kind of disappointment in both sides in one sense. But we have one party that has the policy of arguing that the federal government should have the power to coerce compliance with the transgender revolution throughout society. And all the way down to, health services paying for such procedures and things. And of course, the question is whether parents can even prevent that from happening with their teenagers or even be told of all this. So we're talking about the invasion of the domain of the family. We're talking about creation order, and that's a new thing. I mean, even though there were big issues, including abortion and say same-sex marriage on the election as far back as say 2000, well, we're light years from that right now. I think that's the sense in which it's not wrong to say this election is particularly consequential.
A lot of our people in our church, they want to honor God in the way they think about politics. I don't think we have a ton of people who are supporting Harris. I'm sure that there are some. And so they're not really deciding between Trump or Harris. For a lot of people, they're trying to decide between Trump in not voting or Trump in voting third party. And for a lot of people, it comes down to the dilemma is about, Trump's character. They'll say Trump's character is not very good. His position on abortion is weak. Some people, they'll say something like he's a threat to democracy. And so I don't even know if I want him to win. And so how would you counsel a believer to think through that question?
Well, I respect the way you frame the question. And I think there are honest Christians who can be in a predicament in which they just don't know what to do. And by the way, that doing nothing does not mean that that doesn't imply that doing nothing is the right answer. In some cases, it means having to think about this more, or even get more information and think through it as comprehensively in a Christian manner as possible. I mean, voting has consequences, but in an electoral system, not voting has consequences as well. And so we'd have to take responsibility for not voting. And you mentioned a third party system, and this is where I just want to help American Christians understand. A third party vote could really make sense if we were a parliamentary system of government. And so if we were in Britain, a third party could make a lot of sense, because a third party could at least, gain a few seats in parliament and be able to use that for political leverage. But in the United States, especially when you look at the presidency and the electoral college, it's a winner-take-all system in all but a few exceptions. And even then, it doesn't matter. You're really looking at the fact that the choice is going to be between one of two candidates, and it's going to be one with D and one with R. And, that's not in the Constitution per se, but it is in the Constitution in terms of how the electoral college works. And so, third party efforts, by the way, don't even really work at the congressional district level in the United States. We're not a parliamentary system, so that really doesn't work well. And not voting comes with political consequences. And I concede there are problems everywhere you look in this political equation. But in a fallen world, I think at times Christians have to kind of grow up and recognize, I got to choose between two inadequate options, but they're not equally inadequate. And government is going to be put in place. And I've got to bear some responsibility, my own franchise, that is voting responsibility, for which of these candidates is able to form a government in terms of the power of the executive branch and the administrative state. And given the threats that I think are posed by one party, even to Christian liberty in terms and Christian expression, and the ability of, say, a Christian school to operate on Christian principles, again, I think this is incredibly consequential. And to me, it's an easy issue. But I've been at this a long time, and I don't say it's an uncomplicated issue. I don't say it's an untroubling issue. But in reality, it's going to be A or B. And the dangers posed by the two candidates they're not the same. And when it comes to, say, upholding the constitutional order, I just want to say I see a recklessness on one side and a premeditated strategy on the other side. And I want to be honest, it's not like you have constitutional stability in one party and great respect for the Constitution in one party and disrespect in the other. I think the left has represented a threat to our constitutional order right up front. I mean, just look at how they're dismissing the Supreme Court's authority in a situation like Dobbs, want to subvert it. They were all for the Supreme Court when it was an activist court, but not when it's just judging itself by the text of the Constitution. So I just think we have to kind of grow up and realize there's no out here. There's no easy out, except, I guess, if you're a citizen of, say, New Zealand watching Americans vote. If you're an American Christian, you can't evade the responsibility.
In 2016, I don't know if this is correct, but did you vote for Trump in 2016? And if you didn't, what has changed between 2016 and 2024 in your thinking?
It's been really great to be with you guys. Thank you for this conversation. No, I'm kidding you. I will answer the question. Yeah. No, I mean, if you live long enough, you got some things you got to explain, and I'll explain it. In 2016, I did not think Donald Trump was a serious candidate. I didn't think he was serious. I mean, for one thing, he'd been in a radically pro-abortion position, and now he's supporting a pro-life position. But, when he was in office, he started acting on many of the issues important to me in a very serious way. And that's why I supported him in 2020. And frankly, I'll tell you, my political motivation as a Christian trying to think these things through, I'm really more interested in 2024 in blocking a Harris-Walz administration. Just simply because I know the threat it represents. And And so I don't want to be morally evasive. I will vote as the alternative to that Democratic progressivism, and right now that is Donald Trump. Now I wouldn't say there are no situations in which that could be invalidated, but at this point, I think we as Americans and as American Christians have a pretty good idea what we're facing, and nothing's unproblematic. I want to acknowledge that. Nothing's unproblematic. I didn't think Trump was serious in 2016. He proved himself pretty serious on an awful lot of issues, made a difference. 3 Supreme Court appointments, let's remember, that have changed American history. And he's not where I wish he would be on any number of issues. But we're also looking at the president's power to appoint 4,000 senior officers of the administrative state. And, that's massive in terms of how a Christian school in North Carolina operates, for example. It's massive in terms of the definition of Title IX and government enforcement. Those are big issues. I think we have to talk about them openly.
So, Dr. Mohler, with that in mind, just kind of the threat level and what you're saying about the Democratic Party and progressive left, how do we make sense of prominent Christian leaders who have come out in support, publicly endorsing Kamala Harris, from pastors or leaders of different ministries and whatnot? How do we process that? Because I think a lot of our people, they're kind of like, how do we think through that question?
Well, I can't get into people's hearts, but I know many of the people you're talking about. And I'll simply say, I want to say to some of them, if 10 years ago we were describing a worst case candidate scenario on the issues of importance to us, I think we'd fall short of what's actually represented by Kamala Harris, who exceeds what we saw as kind of a worst case scenario on these issues. I mean, one of the things I point out is that she has called for pre-clearance for the states, even to restrict abortion. Pre-clearance goes back to the civil rights era, in which the federal courts had to approve a state, say, restricting abortion at any point. Well, that approval would never come. This is just a way of just completely shutting down the pro-life movement. And so I just want to say she was who you would define as a worst case scenario, and now you're supporting her. I think their logic fails on its face. I'm not saying they're lying to us. I feel I'm honor bound to say I assume they're telling us the truth about what they're thinking. I think it's disastrous thinking. Now, I've got to take responsibility for my thinking. And I want to be honest, I don't think there's any easy answer to these questions in terms of trying to figure out, who would do exactly what. We have to go on the basis of what their platforms and their policies are. With Donald Trump, we also have what he did in his first term. With Kamala Harris, we have the evidence of the Biden-Harris administration. We also have her statements and actions when she was a senator and attorney general of California. I add that up. I reject the idea that one of those candidates is a threat to our constitutional order. Frankly, I think in some sense it can be argued that both are. And I think, I'm looking for the candidate who will uphold more of what I believe to be the rightful role of government and what is justice and truth and righteousness. And that's why I'll be honest. I think it's disastrous to make the argument that the candidate who is just basically for abortion without restrictions, and I know she says she's not, but she has been. She chose as her vice president one who signed such radical legislation, and there's no way her party would let her get away with anything less than that. And when it comes to the Biden administration, Title IX, putting transgender, that means boys on girls' teams, men on women's teams. It means it means, I'm not even go down the parade of horribles, but it means all those things. And then when you look at the disrespect for religious liberty, and it's going to be very, very difficult even for a Christian school, not to say just a private school, but a Christian school to operate on this basis. I see that as a clear and present danger.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I think we do as well, and it is disheartening to see, but and somewhat confusing. But I agree with you. I think when you look at what's going on in the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris, her record, and Tim Walz's record, it's pretty obvious what's at stake and who's a greater threat.
Yeah, and I mean, all we have to do is take them at their word. So again, I'm not having to try to read Kamala Harris's heart. I can read her voting record and her statements. And I mean, even making very clear she supported taxpayer funding for sex reassignment surgery for prisoners in the jails. You just look at it and you go, what's the logic there? And then you look at the non-discrimination policies they're looking at, and which they already say they support. The Title IX new policies already handed down by the Biden administration, and you go, well, I don't have to read your mind. I just have to look at what you say.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, it seems like one of the potential threats that comes under a Harris administration is the Equality Act.
Yeah.
That has failed has failed previously, but the threat of packing the courts and foregoing the filibuster and trying to shove the Equality Act and constitutional amendments kind of down the throat of the American Constitution, that seems to be like a really dangerous thing. So, as pastors of a not very big church in Des Moines, Iowa, we see that as not a good thing. But there are big churches that are gospel preaching churches all over the country. So what do you see as at stake for faithful gospel preaching should the Equality Act get passed?
Yeah, let's be honest about what it means. And I really appreciate you raising the issue. The equality would mean that the federal government says that an entire range of persons covered by protected identity, they are protected by the state. And thus any form of negative statement, negative action, negative judgment, any statement against this is considered a form of harm against such individuals. And, I want to be honest. I don't want to tell pastors, like, they're going to come and put you in jail for what you say in the pulpit. I'm not saying that. I think there are people who like to do that, but I don't think that's likely in the near future. I don't think they're going to come and, basically say you can't meet Sunday morning in your church. I think what they're going to do is make it virtually impossible for your church members to operate in any way consistent with your Christian convictions in the workplace. And this means all over the workplace. I mean, I am certain this means that the indoctrination of our children in the schools is just going to continue. And you have colleges and universities, if they receive Title IX funds, student aid funding, participation in student loans, they're going to have to prove that they are in this. And it puts the power of the federal government, because the Equality Act would allow the federal government to act as prosecutor of that agenda in any number of court contexts. And, the big issue there is not a bunch of Christians going to jail. That could happen. The big issue there is Christians intimidated from believing, acting, and living out Christian truth. That's the great danger. And, I will simply, say to you guys, when you look at the issue, for instance, of same-sex marriage, as it came down in 2015, Bergefell decision, the federal government did not say, and didn't threaten they're going to put evangelical pastors in prison for saying this is wrong. But you know what? I think there are an awful lot of evangelical pastors who just talk about everything else but that. And I think that's the effect we just need to understand here. The Equality Act would add teeth to all that. But, quite frankly, there are an awful lot of evangelical pastors who appear to be intimidated into silence by less than that.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, I've thought about that, just how the Equality Act puts the teeth to it. But yeah, just getting pastors to be silent on the issue of marriage and life or gender or whatever that has in one sense, the same kind of impact.
And it's a giant win for the left. And I don't mean the left just politically, but let's just say the culture agenda, subverting creation order. I think they want more than our silence, but silence is a good place to start.
One question I've been asked several times this political season is the question: how should Christians rightly prioritize this particular election? Because some people will say that elections don't matter at all, so just sit it out, whatever. Just quote, trust in God. The other extreme is to put all your hope in this election. And I know I've had a lot of conversations where people feel like, okay, if Trump wins, we're going to be good. If Kamala wins, we're in big trouble. And so it's easy to put your hope in man. And scriptures tell us, don't put your hope in princes. It is a vain thing. And so how do we walk that line of rightly prioritizing the election?
Yeah, it's a well-asked question. I will say that when you talk about not putting our hope in princes, that means we don't put the wrong hope in princes. We do hope the princes will prince. And, in other words, there's a Romans
Good
13
point.
aspect to this, so what we don't put is any ultimate hope in princes, ultimate hope only in Christ. And I understand what you say is kind of the twin problems here. And look, you can see in your average evangelical church, you can probably see a little bit of both. You can see some people who kind of want to be instant Anabaptists and just say, the political process is too messy, not going to have anything to do with it. And you have other people who are just a little too excited about it. And as you say, invest too much hope. Elections have consequences. That's a big principle we need to understand. But and by the way, that's one of the reasons evangelical Christians, being faithful evangelical Christians, if you have children, you get them up in the morning, you feed them breakfast, and you take them to school, and you do all the things you have to do as Christian families. You don't get up in the morning and the first thing you think about is politics. How to organize the local precinct. It's one of the reasons why the left, having far more people, just even demographically, with fewer families, they got more time to give to politics. So, as pastors, we don't want our moms and dads to get up in the morning and think, first of all, political thoughts. We want them to take care of their kids and love their kids and operate all the time it takes to invest in family. But there is a political responsibility. And so I tell people after Election Day, you know what evangelical Christians are going to do? They're going to get the kids up. They're going to get them dressed and feed them breakfast and do the same things they do. But the challenges they face may be different, and the challenges their children face may be different the day after the election in horrifying ways, or less horrifying ways. And the vote could make the difference. And I hope I'm describing this in a way that's helpful. There's some people we need to tell, not so much to be less invested in politics, but just to get things in proportion. And the other thing, as you mentioned, is that our political responsibility, it's real easy to focus on Election Day because that's kind of like the big test every 4 years when you come to the American presidency. But our political responsibility is every day of our lives, especially in light of love of neighbor. I better stop or I'll just drone on.
No, that's great. That's helpful. And I think there is a sense. I have 5 kids, and there is a sense that as I've watched my kids grow up, I feel the weight of these decisions that are going to be made, the policies that are going to be made, the weight of the election. And so there is a part of me as I've gotten older where I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a big deal. In my heart, I can feel my heart moving in that direction. And so I don't want to put my hope in that. And I don't think Christians want to put their hope in it. At the same time, like you said, there is a big responsibility that we have as Christians to be the salt and the light in the political process. And I heard a statistic. I don't know if this is true. You guys can correct me. But is it like 32 million Christians are estimated to not vote at all in this election? And is that right? I mean, it's a huge number.
Positive.
I mean, it's a huge number.
Can I put a little footnote in there?
Yes.
You guys are gospel committed Christians, pastors. You're going to define Christian in a way that's very different than a pollster would define Christian. So I don't think there are 30 million gospel-centered Christians who aren't going to vote. I think there could be an awful lot of them, but I don't think it can be 30 million. I think there can be 30 million who are counted as Christian in a pollster scheme. That's more than 10% of the voting population at the moment. That's a little too theologically generous, I think. But your point is well made. There are an awful lot of Christians gospel-loving Christians who just haven't thought this through.
So how would you help us as pastors? And we have a couple weeks before the election. What advice would you have for us as pastors in trying to help shepherd and lead and direct our church as we approach the election?
What a great question. And time is running out. So you got basically like 2 Sundays ahead of us. And I don't think church members come wanting you to preach on the election. But on the other hand, this is a giant political fact. And so, I'm sure many of you are in expositional series, and the recovery of that's been a great thing, preaching through a book. And I think at times it's not so much that you're doing something different in your sermon. The sermon text may lend itself to that. You could decide, to preach a special text because of the looming challenge. You just want to help your Christians, your church members to think through. But even in something like, I'll tell you, my pastor and some others I know really help to provide calm and assurance, but also challenge in a pastoral prayer, which can just be very powerful. Praying that the Lord will guide us as we try to go through these things. I think there are other ways pastors can make comments of a truly pastoral, Christian pastoral nature to help Christians to think through how to negotiate these days. And, I think one of the things we need to do is make sure we keep everything in proper proportion, which means we underline how important all this is, but we also look to our people and say, you know what, we're the people who can't panic. We're the people who are going to take care of our kids and do what we do the day after the election, the same thing we did the day before the election. We're going to get up and we're going to be the same people who on the Lord's Day are going to be back here in worship and seeking to not only hear, but to believe and to do God's word and to raise godly offspring and to be salt and light in our community. I hope I'm making sense. I can just tell
absolutely.
from talking to the three of you, you've got a great sense of this balance. And I think encouraging pastors to have that sense of balance. American history could well turn in one sense, maybe in more than one sense, on the 2024 election. The kingdom of God is not going to turn on the basis of the 2024 election. So we are, as Christians, thanks be to God, citizens of a heavenly kingdom. But we're also, by God's sovereignty, citizens of an earthly kingdom. The heavenly kingdom is unshakable. Earthly kingdom, shakeable. And remaining faithful in the middle of that shaking is a real Christian challenge.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think that's really encouraging, and I know we want to honor your time and know that we're running a little short here. So I want to add, you have an opportunity here now. Just what encouragement would you have for the saints in the church in Des Moines, Iowa, in 2024 as we look at the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think it should be the same. I would speak to those who are believers in Anchorage or Miami or Des Moines. And I just want to say, the most important thing is that the church will preach the word in season and out of season. Preach the gospel, hold to the gospel, teach the gospel to our children, encourage one another in the gospel. And that means encourage one another to faithfulness. And faithfulness comes in many forms, and it comes with many tests. And one of those tests comes the first Tuesday in November of this year. Let's encourage one another to righteousness and faithfulness. And let's understand that the kingdom of Christ is not riding on this election, but, a part of Christian faithfulness and even the context of Christian witness and Christian ministry and Christian families, part of that is riding on the election. So putting it in the proper perspective is a part of what Christians get to do. And, you look at a map in the United States, you see red and blue and all of this. The fact is that we have to look at the map of the world and see great need for the gospel and see God's glory in the salvation of sinners and in the rightful ordering and worship of gospel churches. And that's and raising godly progeny in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Those are our first priorities. Most of what we fight for in the other is for love of neighbor and for the right to maintain those priorities. So I hope just putting that in symmetry, saying it really is important, but you know what? The day after the election, we're going to be preparing for the next Lord's Day when we gather. But, the election day is important. Lord's Day just infinitely more important.
That's right. Well, I don't know if we could adequately express how thankful we are that you would take this time to sit down with us. So we really appreciate it. We really value your insight just as a Christian thought leader, as someone who really cares about the church and cares about seeing Christians equipped for the sake of just living in a world that is increasingly even antagonistic towards them. So we really thank you for sitting down with us, and we appreciate you being with us this morning.
Well, guys, it's been an encouragement to me to know that in Des Moines, you guys are ministering to the glory of God. And I thank you for having this conversation with me. It's been a privilege. God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.